Good morning. We begin today's daf Lamed Vav 36, Maseches Bava Basra. We begin by thanking all of our sponsors. We thank Daniel, Batsheva, Pava, Chashbonim, Israel for sponsoring all the shiurim and all the drushes of the month of Tammuz in the memory of the father of Shlomo ben Yehuda Aryeh of Philadelphia in his first yahrzeit. The family should have an nechama and the neshama should have an aliyah, the Gan Eden. We also dedicate our learning, as we do all the time, to the fallen, those who have fallen in battle. This morning we dedicate our Limud Torah for a fallen Israeli killed by a rocket near Popko, in the Shamash Havan Aliyah Gan Eden. And also we dedicate all of our learning to the soldiers who are fighting on the front lines, and for the zchus of the hostages, that they should be brought back to Shalom Ubeshalva, the hair of a Karov. We also give Shvach to Kadosh Baruch Hu for erasing and eradicating some evil of the world, whose name may not be mentioned in the Beis Medrash, but the Shem Rishon Yerkov and Eretz Hashem, we should see more of a success on behalf of the IDF to eradicate evil. Ubi Arta Harabi Kirbecha. We're going to begin on Daf Lamed Hey Amud Beis. 5 lines from the bottom. Amar Yehuda, Amar Rab. So we're going to have a number of statements, various statements about chazaka. And as we've mentioned a number of times in the past, that when it comes to a chazaka, there's basically 2 critical ingredients that have to be met for a chazaka to work. Obviously, the bread and butter of a chazaka is that a person is inside a field or a particular property for 3 years. But that chazaka needs to be, number one, a chazaka without any protests. In other words, the original owner can't come by and protest or make some type of claim of objection to this person's ownership. That's what qualifies the chazaka. And number 2, the chazaka also has to be qualified and backed up by a taina. So if you have a chazaka without a taina, it's called a chazaka she'ein imo taina, it's worthless. What does that mean? The person claims that they're in a field, but doesn't present a valid reason as to why they should be in that field. Why do you belong here? Why do you own this field? The chazaka doesn't mean anything. It's going to be just an empty barrel holding nothing in it, or whatever the mashal might be. The bottom line is it can't hold any water if you don't have a claim. So therefore, if a person claims that I'm in this field for 3 years, 4 years, 10 years, 12 years, but doesn't make a claim that they bought it, doesn't make a claim that they've gotten this field through any legal means of ownership, so then the chazaka is worthless. And therefore the Gemara is going to say as follows. Amar Yehuda Amar Rav, Yisrael haba machmas akum, harehu ka'akum. A Yisrael who buys a field from an akum and then uses that as his claim as to why he should own the field, he is not any better off than the akum himself. And he explains, Ma'akum ein lo chazaka ela b'shtar. Just like when it comes to an akum who wants to claim ownership over a field, he's not going to be able to claim ownership over the field unless he presents a shtar. Af Yisrael haba machmas akum. So the same thing is true when it comes to Yisrael haba machmas akum. Then he's also going to have a shtar. Ein lo chazaka ela b'shtar. He's going to have a shtar. So now, why is this true? And the Rashbam explains this in great detail. But basically, let's just go. We'll read it. It's the last Rashbam on the page. It's a bit lengthy, but it reads very smoothly. So I'll read it together with you. Yisrael ba machmas akum areu ka'akum. So the Rashbam explains. Sada sha'kol yodim shehoseh Yisrael. A field that everybody knew that one time belonged to a Jewish person. V'achla akum shalosh shana. And now a non-Jew moves into this field, and not just a non-Jew, an akum moves into the field. O yoser, or he's living there for a long time. V'toin shelakha mi Yisrael. He makes a claim that the field was purchased from the Yisrael. Now, v'azal Yisrael. So now a third person comes along. Let's remember. You have Reuven, who's the original Yisrael who owns the field. You have Mr. Akum, who occupies the field for 3+ years. And then you have another Yisrael, his name is Shimon. He now goes and purchases the field from that Akum. So it says, "V'kana me'ahu akum, v'achla gam hu achara akum shnei chazaka." That Yisrael, call him Yishimin, he lived in the field for the required 3 years. O Yoser or more. Halach is lo avi chazaka, ella asi mari da'ara. The original owner can come, umapik le miyade di Yisrael. He could go ahead and take the field out of the hands of the third person, who's the second Yisrael involved in that story. Now, Yisrael, lezel v'litva la'akum. Dezavamine, he can go to the secular court system, take that akum who sold the field to him, take him to court, and try to get his money back from him. Why? The iu hu the afsid anafshe. This Yisrael, Shimon, who bought the field, he's the one who caused himself his own loss. Why? The lohava le mizban arad Yisrael me'akum ad the le hav li shtar zavini de zavantla mi Yisrael. He should not have purchased this field from the akum until the akum can substantiate that he legally and rightfully bought the field from Reuven. The fact that he didn't do that is his own problem and now his own loss. He loses out now because he didn't get that verification that he bought it. And he explains, like we say, I skipped. The din chazaka less leila akum. There's no chazaka for an akum. V'lo lekol man da'asi machmase. And nobody comes through the power of the akum has that chazaka. Why? Distam akum gazlanim heim v'yisrael yarei limchos v'hilkach lo tiknu ben chazaka. So Rashbam explains, we have to recognize that there wasn't always a good legal system that protected people equally, whether they're Jewish or not Jewish. So therefore, for many years, it just was simple. The Jew owned property, take it from him. And that may have even been legal. Take a piece of property from a Jew. Throughout history, these things have happened. That if a Jew owned property, Jews don't have rights. So therefore, the Akum had the ability to just take the property from the Jew. Now what's the Jew going to do? Go ahead and protest? He's going to raise an objection, get off of my field. It can cost him his life. And therefore, it was known that an Akum didn't have the ability to establish ownership over a field by virtue of the fact that he was there for 3 years and the Jew did not object. And therefore, that doesn't show us any ownership on behalf of the Akum. So if Yisrael goes ahead and carelessly buys this piece of property from the Akum and has no verification that this Akum actually bought the field from the Yisrael, so essentially he's coming to us with a claim with a massive hole in it. He says, I bought the field from the Akum. Now hold on a second. Can you prove that the Akum owned the field? Well, he was living there for 3 years. Well, Akum doesn't get a chazaka by virtue of the fact that he lived there for 3 years, because it was commonplace for an Akum to just confiscate a field from a Jewish person and move in. The fact that he's there for 3 years without any objection or protest on behalf of the Jewish original owner means nothing. He only didn't protest because he wanted to save his life. And therefore, the chazaka that the Akum had there is worthless. And when the subsequent Yisrael goes ahead and purchases the field from the Akum and lives there for 3 years, maybe he lived there for 3 years uncontested, but he has no claim. His claim is, I bought it from the Akum. But purchasing a field from an Akum does not actually establish ownership over the field, and therefore, as the Rashbam will continue explaining, this would be a typical chazaka she'eni motaina. It's a chazaka that is not substantiated by a valid claim of ownership. Amar Rava. So Rava explains. The Amar Yisrael. If the Yisrael is going to explain, top of Lamed Vav Amud Aleph, L'didi Amar li Akum. Diminach zavna mehem. So interesting. Rava says, if the Yisrael claims that I'm here for the required years of chazaka, I'm here for 3 years, and you know why I'm here? Because I purchased it from the Akum. But guess what? I'm not just claiming that I purchased it from the Akum. The Akum told me that he bought it from you. Says Rava, in such a case, Meheman is going to be believed, and now his chazaka is going to work. Now the Gemara says, hold on a second. And you have to just understand this concept of Meheman. He's believed. What does it mean he's believed? He's believed that what? He's believed that the Akim told him that? Very nice. I believe you that the Akim told you that. I don't think you're lying. But I don't believe that the Akim owned the field. So then what does this Meheman believe? And what does it help us? So Rashbam explains, since it entered his mind to go ahead and make that claim, Hachanami havimatzi limitan zavinta minach. In other words, says the Rashbam, he could have just said, I know that he got the field, he bought it from you, and therefore this Yisrael could have just said, I'm here for 3 years, and I bought the field from you. Just deleting the information that there was an Akim in the middle. The problem with this is, the Gemara says, Mi'ika midi, is there ever a circumstance, the ilu Akum Amar, the Akum himself would stand before us in this basin and say something, Lo Meheman, we won't believe a word that comes out of his mouth. V'ilu Amar Yisrael, Mishmei Akum, Meheman. Oh, all of a sudden, Pitom, you're quoting the Akum. Oh, he told me he bought it from you. And all of a sudden, basically, going to be like, ooh, all right, you told me he said so. It must be true. It makes no sense. If the Akum himself was standing before us, testifying that he bought the field from the original Yisrael, Reuven, we're going to say, I'm sorry, we don't believe you. There's a pretty bad track record over here of Akum stealing property from Yisrael. So therefore, we're not going to believe you. But if the subsequent Yisrael quotes the Akum, all of a sudden we're going to believe, and that makes no sense. So, Mi'ika midi, ilu Akum Amar, lo Meheman, ilu Amar Yisrael, mishmei de Akum, Meheman. Is there ever a circumstance where if the Akum himself says something, we won't believe a word that comes out of his mouth, but if the Yisrael quotes the Akum, all of a sudden we're going to start believing him? It doesn't make sense. Elama Rava, the Gemara says it must be, the Rava had an entirely different intention in mind. He Amar Yisrael, Kami Didi Zavna Akum Minach, V'Zavna Nehali Meheman. She has to say this whole long line, which basically is, the Yisrael says, it was in front of me, I bear witness to the fact that the Akum purchased the field appropriately and legally from the original Yisrael. And then I bought the field from that Akum. In such a case, we'll take the word of this Machzik and we'll actually believe him. In other words, in such a case, it makes sense. The Yisrael is saying, so let's just play out the case. A guy goes over to Yisrael, the Marikama, Reuven, goes over to Yisrael, to the second Yisrael, to Shimon, and says to him, Shimon, my boss, Ara, what are you doing in this land? And he says, Kami Didi, in front of me, this Akum went ahead and purchased the field from you. And I bought the field from him, and I was here for the Shnei Chazak, for the requisite 3 years that are needed to be able to establish a Chazaka. In such a case, we're going to believe him that the Akum actually legally bought the field. The Gemara explains why. Migu di'ibai amarle anaza vinta minach. He could have just deleted that whole piece of information in the middle and said, Reuven, I know you own this field. I remember you own this field, but I also know that you sold it to me, and I'm here for the required years of Chazaka. So now, if he was lying about anything that he's saying, he would have just said that. That's the easiest, cleanest, most simple, and believable lie. He could simply say, I'm here for the required years of Chazaka. I know you sold the field because I was the guy who bought it from you. Now, he didn't say that. You know why he didn't say that? Because he's telling the truth when he's saying that I bear witness to the fact that you sold the field legally and appropriate for full value to this Akum, and the Akum was a rightful owner over the field, and therefore I have the ability to purchase this field or this home from the Akum who is in the middle. Okay, and therefore he has his required Chazaka, and in addition to the Chazaka, he also has a taina, a valid claim. Okay, the Gemara goes on. Amar Yehuda, Hayman denakit magla v'tovila. We actually learned this Gemara in Daf Lamed Gimel. A person who's holding a magla, a sickle, a tuvila, is this rope, climbing rope, that he needs in order to get up. It's interesting. The Rashbam just writes over here, Kvar Precious Lela'el. I explained this one earlier. Now, you would have thought that the Rashbam wrote extensively on this beforehand. He didn't want to write it again. But this is one of those cases the Rashbam previously didn't write so much. He just explained what happened over here. But in Daf Lamed Gimel, we saw this Gemara already, which is a person who's holding onto a sickle in this rope. V'amar Ezel Igzra Ladikla Deplanya Dizavinti Mine. I'm going into your field to cut down all these dates that grew on your tree. Halach is Meheman. He's believed. We don't require him to come up with a shtar, with any type of document or a contract that he actually purchased it. Why? Because lo chatzif inish the migzar dikla delav delay. A person, normal person, will not have the chutzpah to just walk into someone else's field and start harvesting their fruits. It's just not a normal thing to do. Normal people don't do that unless they have the legal right to do that. So again, this requires that the person be normal. But again, that's the idea of the Gemara, is that we take normal behavior into account. It's not normal for a person to have the audacity to walk into someone else's field. Imagine in today's time, a guy shows up with like a, what are those things called? Like a cherry picker. He was driving in one of those United rental things. Starts driving into someone's yard. Excuse me, putting cones down, setting up a whole whole net on the bottom to catch all the dates. Because I'm here to cut down the fruits. You don't do that in someone else's field unless you actually have the rights to be there. If you don't have the rights to be there, normal people don't do that. If a person might pick something off, by mistake, and eat it, all right, we understand that sometimes people make that kind of mistake. But the chutzpah to go into someone's field full of equipment and start harvesting their fruits, that's just not a normal thing to do unless you actually have permission for it, and we consider that to be enough of a chazaka that you're telling the truth. Next. V'amar Rav Yehuda, Hayman da'achzik miguda da'arudi ulebar lo have chazaka. A person who made a chazaka outside of the fence where there are wild animals, it's not a chazaka. There's two ways of understanding this, but we'll go with the Rashbam. Rashbam explains as follows. There's a part of a field where we'll see it inside just quickly. Chayos hasada shabos v'ochos hazram shebektzos hasada. You have these wild animals that come and eat what grows on the edges of the field. V'yesh osim kiros v'godrin hasada. People make walls and they fence off their field. Umanichin karka chutz lakir ma'at. They leave a little bit of their own private property outside of the wall. Besados hasmuchos liyar. On fields that are close to the forest. Umashlichim sham zera. They will throw like leftover seeds over there. Umashetzomeach bo'os hachayos v'ochel. So it grows from those seeds. The wild animals of the field come and they eat it up. So now v'ochlos osa. Ve'enon nechnasos b'sada. They can't get into the field because there's a fence. Now ve'imba adam ve'hichzik ba'oso karka. If a random other person moves in to that little strip of karka outside of the field, chutz together, ain't a chazaka. It's not a chazaka, and the Rashbam explains, the yachalomar kivin the kol mad zarabu karka arudi achile. The Gemara explains this as well. We'll just see it inside. My time meimar amar kol dezara nami arude achlile. Whatever I'm going to plant there, the animals eat it anyway, so why should I bother protesting? So again, the premise of a chazaka is that you were here for 3 years, uncontested. No objection was raised. In this case, the way the Rashbam explains it is, a person owns a piece of property. He puts a fence around his property because he doesn't want all the wild animals to come into his field and eat whatever he's planting. But he does throw some seeds over the fence on that little strip of property that he owns, which is beyond his fence. Now, if some person decided to just move in to that piece of property, I don't know, maybe a homeless guy decided, hey, listen, there's a piece of property over here, it's on the outside of a fence, it's not in the forest yet, it's nice and quiet, guess what, there's also things that are growing over here, person moves in, person cannot establish a chazak on the piece of property, because the fact that nobody complained about your existence on the piece of property is not indicative of the fact that you're a legitimate owner. Why not? The Gemara explains, because the owner can simply say, I had no reason to object to you being there. As a matter of fact, there's all kinds of animals that are taking up residence in that area all the time anyway. I have all the groundhogs that are there, the foxes that are roaming around at night, all the deer that are roaming around come there. The bears come. The entire Baltimore wildlife lives over there. So why should I go ahead and protest about the fact that a human being moved in over there? Gesund to hate, live there like anything else. Why do I have to complain about that? But the fact you could establish a chazaka by being there, that's what's going to be missing. You can't do that without having a shtar. Yehuda makes another statement. Achla arla, if a person ate arla, eina chazaka. What does this mean? The first 3 years that trees are planted, you can't benefit from the field, from the fruits that grow there. So therefore, a person goes ahead and plants a brand new orchard filled with trees. And what happens? A guy shows up during those 3 years and makes a chazaka. He moves in, starts eating the fruit, he starts acting like an owner in the field. The guy says to himself, why do I have to bother protesting this guy? I mean, it's Arla. He's not allowed to be here anyway. So, Tanya Namihach, the Gemara says, Tanya Namihach, we have another verse which says the same thing. Achla, Arla, person ate from Arla, Shavias, which is benefiting from that Shavias is a little different because it's not usher to eat those fruit. But all those fruit are hefker. Uklayim, that's something which, again, depending on what it is, klayim could be usher to plant. If it's klayim in a keren, then it's usher to have anal from it. Eina chazaka. Now that does not establish a chazaka. And we see the Rashbam explains to us, Dolo ichbas le labala sada bishnas arla v'lachein lo micha. Again, every chazaka has to have that establishment of, if I was not the legitimate owner, you most definitely would have come out and told me to get out of here. Like we learned all the way at the beginning of the parak. At the beginning of the parak, we had the terminology that the Rashbam brought down, which was, it's not normal for a person. Ein lecha adam. Rashbam wrote something like that, if I remember correctly. Ein lecha adam. There's no person in the world who sees another moving to his field for extended periods of time and is quiet. But guess what? If you move into my field and you're eating fruit that I'm not allowed to eat anyway, then you know what I'm going to say? Gesund to hate. Go ahead, enjoy yourself. Why should I bother wasting my time getting into a fight with some guy to kick him off of the land? I can't benefit from these fruit anyway. You want to go ahead and eat fruit which is asr, that's going to be your issue to take up with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. But ultimately, I have no reason to protest you when you're eating arla. I have no reason to protest you when you're eating klayim. When it comes to shvius, I certainly have no reason to protest against you, because you know what? It's hefker. You're allowed to eat those fruit. And therefore, the fact that I was quiet does not indicate any valid sale that took place. Amar Rabbi Yosef. Achla shachas lo avi chazaka. If a person ate a full chazaka of shachas, it's not either a chazaka. What's shachas? So shachas is similar, or maybe even the exact same thing as aspasta. We mentioned this a number of times throughout the Masechta, which is pre-ripe grain that's cut down. They generally use it for animal fodder. So if a person goes ahead and moves into a field, and during those, again, Rashbam explains, shalohimtin ad shetigdala tevua, he didn't wait until the grain completely grew till it was ripe. Ella gimel shanim katra kishihi shachas. For 3 full years, this person harvested everything prematurely. Umachil behemto. He fed it to his animal. Says Rashbam, eina chazaka. That's not a chazaka. Why? The shamet v'achil. We saw this expression earlier in this parak, which is he's not eating he's not. Achil in this case is not the right terminology, but achil is used often in this parak to explain you've used it. In other words, you haven't used it appropriately. It's been like a very type of like a flippant type of use, not really using it properly. So in such a case, the person says, "Why do I have to bother going ahead and protesting against this guy? Because he's not using it properly." Again, Rashbam explains, "Lefikach lo chashash zel limchos bo sheish raglayim ledavar sheyarei hu lahachzik kishar bnei adam lefish begezel yarba." Says Rashbam, the fact that you actually use this field instead of waiting for the grain to get ripe and harvesting it like a normal person and then turning it into regular grain and flour and using it to bake bread, you always cut it off prematurely. You know why? Because you're living on edge. You're always running away. You always want to make sure that you get whatever you can from it, so therefore you cut it down prematurely and use it as animal feed. That's not something which I have to bother going ahead and protesting, because your entire existence in the field existed in a way which indicated that you were a thief. Next, Amarava. The Ibet Savar b'Mechuza, if this person happens to live in this place called Savar Mechuza, if this person would have been located in Savar Mechuza, then it is a chazaka. Why? Because apparently over there was very normal for people to have lots of animals. The Rashbam tells us, the people there were wealthy, they had a lot of animals, and therefore they actually did harvest entire fields every single year just to be able to create enough animal feed to sustain their animals. Amar Rav Nachman, Tapticha lo avi chazaka. Certain kind of field called tapticha. Again, Rashbam explained it is a very low quality type of land. It's basically filled with valleys, but it doesn't grow anything. It sounds like that it's such a low quality piece of property because it seems to get wet and they get very dried up, and therefore it's not something which has the ability to be able to produce fruit. In such a case, there's no chazaka there. Why? For the same idea. Since it's such a low quality piece of property, the owner doesn't feel the necessity to immediately kick the person out if the person is living there, because he has not much to gain by kicking the person out. You can't use it for planting anyway. Next, apikura v'ayal kura, if the field produced so little that it literally only produced the amount that you put into it. So you put in a kura of whatever you're planting, and you brought back exactly what you put in. Pretty bad investment. In such a case, lo avi chazaka, again, because the person doesn't care so much to go ahead and protest that. V'hani debei reish galusa lo machzaki ban v'lo machzakinan behu. Property that's owned by the reish galusa. Reish galusa basically was the one who was in charge of the galus, kind of like a governor type of position. Sometimes they were referred to in a positive light, sometimes in a little bit of more of a negative light. They cannot establish ownership by way of a chazaka, and one cannot establish ownership over property bought from them by way of chazaka either. So again, we need Rashbam to explain to us why. He explains as follows. Lo machzaki ban, it's the third wide line. Im hichzik echad mehen besado seinu. If any member of the reish galusa makes a chazaka in our fields, ain't a chazaka, it doesn't work. V'tzarach li zar v'shtaro, they have to hold on to the document. Demachmas yirasan lo michi bohen. These are people who are high-powered people, and therefore, what, you're going to go ahead and protest the reish galusa? Go fight City Hall. Nothing to talk about. There's really no way that you're going to be able to get that done. So therefore, people don't bother protesting or objecting to something where they feel like it's not worth their time. V'lo machzakinan behu, says Rashbam. Why can't we make a chazaka in field that belongs to them? So interesting. You would think that if you get a field from the reish galusa, and the reish galusa doesn't kick you out, that's the biggest indication you actually bought it, because they can kick you out with no problem. So Rashbam explains, Shemitoch shehem ashirim, since the reish galusa was so wealthy, the yesh lehem batim v'sados harbe, they have so many homes and so many fields. So you know what? Manichim b'nei adam ladar b'bateyem v'shoskin usmechin kedei lashpiach karka shalahem. They have no problem. Someone moves in, maintains the property. They're not going to go ahead and protest it. They have too much property to maintain on their own. And therefore, what's better than having a free tenant come in, move into the property, and then actually take care of it? So the fact that they didn't protest it actually is not an indication of any ownership. At the end, Rashbam brings another understanding, which is that sometimes it could be that they were just too busy. They're busy with communal needs. They just didn't have time to notice that someone was in their field and to go ahead and make a machaf. So therefore, there's no chazaka with fields when it comes to the reish galusa. Now getting back to our Mishnah. One of the items mentioned in the Mishnah which can be acquired by way of a chazaka is an eved. V'ho avadim. What is that? A servant. So now the Gemara says, avadim, yesh lem chazaka. Is it true that you could actually acquire or prove ownership over an eved by way of a chazaka? That can't be true. V'amrei shlakish hagodros ein lehem chazaka. Godros, which are animals, movable animals, don't have chazaka. So what's the comparison over here? Let's just quickly explain what's going on here. There's basically three levels when it comes to the acquired ownership over different items. You have metaltal. Metaltal are movable objects. So this clock over here is a movable object. I could take ownership over it immediately by taking it into my possession. Okay? Once I have this in my possession, now you all will bear witness to the fact that if I take this home today, I stole this from the shul. So I won't do that. But if I have a clock like this in my possession, it's in my house, and I have it for one day, and someone comes and says, "Sir, the clock is mine," I could say, "Listen, I'll have Aryeh. It's mine. It's my possession. I have it." Therefore, chazaka, after one day, essentially makes it mine. All the way on the other end, we have some items which, let's put godros in the middle. Godros are movable items. So they're movable items, but they're mobile on their own. So, for example, an animal, it can move on its own. So it's metaltal, and I could pick up an animal and carry it home, but the animal also has the ability to walk into my backyard or to walk into my house. So the fact that there's an animal in my house, hopefully that shouldn't be the case, but the fact that there's an animal in my house does not indicate the fact that it's actually mine. You know why? Because it could have just come in to my house. This clock can't walk into my house, but an animal can walk into my house. So now the fact that it's there doesn't mean that it's mine. And then all the way on the other side, you have something which is a bendas, which is a human being, which again, there's the whole idea of eved and chazaka, but just on the basic point, which is if you can't acquire animals by way of a chazaka, because they could have just walked into your house, so an eved is the same thing. He could take a walk. He can come visit. He shows up for lunch. That doesn't indicate that it's mine. So therefore, Rish Lakish says, Hagodros einam chazaka, mobile, movable objects such as, or animals, which can move, which would include an eved as well, einam chazaka. So Amarava, it's true. There's no chazaka, but you're mixing up two things. Remember, at the beginning of this Masech, we talked about the Zecheskas Raya, which is what we're talking about, which is a chazaka, which is a proof that you actually bought something, and there's chazaka, which is a means by which you'll use to acquire something. So ein lehem chazaka la'alter. It's true. They don't have a chazaka right away by virtue of the fact that you have it in your property that you could say it's a chazaka that it's mine, or that I purchased it with a chazaka, or it's a chazaka that I would say I'm most mechaver of Aryeh. You do have a chazaka after 3 years. 3 years, this animal or this eved is in your possession, and no one protested. Well, that's actually a pretty good indication that it's yours. You're right, the animal could have shut up for lunch. You're right, the eved could have come by, but ultimately, for 3 years, you would expect someone to protest. Amarava im hayakatan muto barisa. If this eved was a child that was so small that the baby couldn't walk on its own, basically it's still wrapped up in its in the wrapping of a baby, or I guess in a modern day stroller. Yesh lo chazaka. There is a chazaka even la'alter. Right away. The Gemara says treat, of course. And the whole reason why we don't give a chazaka to an eved is because the eved could have walked over there. But a baby can't walk anywhere, so of course there'll be a chazaka right away. The Gemara says lo tzricha. No, we do need this. Why? The is le'ime. Guess what? If there's a baby, the baby has a mother, and the mother is not there. So ma'od tema neches dilma eme al say la'asa. I think maybe his mother came by one day and brought the baby there, and forgot the baby there. Kamash malan, ema lo manash yibra. Mother doesn't forget her child. In other words, what are we suspecting? We suspect that Ruvain has this female servant. Okay, she belongs to him. Now, maybe there are days when Ruvain doesn't actually have work for her, so she goes ahead and she gets work in Shimon's house. So now we're suspecting that Shimon hired her as a day laborer for one day. She went to go do work in Shimon's house. And what do you do when you have a baby? She showed up to work with her baby. She was doing all the work. She put her baby to sleep. And at the end of her work day, she finished cleaning up the house, folding all the laundry, and guess what? She forgot to bring her baby home. So she went home, and now Shimon says, guess what? I have a little Eved over here. It's going to grow up in my house. This is going to be my Eved forever. And we're going to claim that he's going to claim that he bought this Eved when it's really not true. The Gemara says such a case is ridiculous. Mothers don't forget their children in someone else's house. And therefore, if the child is there, he must have actually paid the right price for it and owns this Eved legally. Okay, Hani easy. There were these goats, the Achlu Cholsha. They were eating this peeled barley, Ben Arda. Asa Mari Cholsha, the owner of this peeled barley, came to the owner of these goats, and Tafsinu, he grabbed them, he held on to these goats, Havikatoyin Tuva. He was claiming they ate a tremendous amount of this barley. So the Amar Avua de Shmuel, the father of Shmuel said, Yachal Liton, he could claim Ad Kedei Demeyen, all the way up to the value of the animals. Why? Now that the goats are in his possession, and he's holding on to the goats, he technically could claim, these goats are mine, I bought them. In other words, as follows. He had all these barley that were drying out in his yard. Some guy's goats showed up and ate a massive lunch. He's furious that they ate up all of his barley. So he grabs onto the goats. Now he wants to claim for the owner, your goats ate up my barley. What's that? As we learned in Masechet Bava Kama, that's a mazah called shame. They would have to pay nezek shalim right away. They'd have to pay for all of the barley that they ate right away. Now, how can he prove how much was eaten? There's no way to prove that. So therefore, he can't claim the full value of what was eaten because he has no proof of how much they ate. So therefore, what does he do? He holds on to these goats. The halacha is, since he technically could have said, these goats are mine, so he could claim up until their value by claiming, listen, I'm going to let them go because I'm going to admit to you that they're not my goats, but I won't let them go because they did eat a certain value of my barley, and he could claim up to the value of these goats. Now the Gemara says, hold on, how could he claim that these goats are his? Didn't Rish Lakish just tell us, Hagodros Elam Chazaka, that these wandering goats don't have a chazaka because they can go wherever they want? Pretty clearly, they do go wherever they want. The Gemara says no. Sani, Izim, for the most part, are very different. Why? The Mesira L'roa. People generally give goats to a shepherd. So the Gemara says, okay, that's very nice. V'ha'ika tzafru panya. There's the morning and the evening. When they're going home from the shepherd, the shepherd just sends them off and they walk back home. The Gemara says, no. It's not true, because in Arda, where the story took place, there were a lot of tayi. The Rashbam tells us these were Yishmaelim Ganavim. That's what they were. They were very shrichi, they were very common. Umiyada liyada mishalmi. People don't just allow their goats to go free because they were concerned about the neighborhood. In that neighborhood, there were lots of thieves, and therefore people didn't want to just allow the goats to roam free because they never would make it home. Okay, getting back to our Mishnah, and our Mishnah told us in a steyabal, a field that requires irrigation, you don't have to have a chazaka for full 3 years. It doesn't have to be miyom liyom. We had a machlokes between Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva. How long that has to be? Rabbi Shmuel told us it's going to be 3 months, 1 year, 3 months. So you can end up having a total of 18 months. Then we had Rabbi Akiva said 1 month, 1 year, and then 1 month, which is a total of 14 months. Lema, oh my. We could do this. Lema near ikabinayu. Let's just say that the machlokes is on plowing. And that's the difference. That Rabbi Shmuel's of the opinion that near lo and chazaka, plowing is not a chazaka, and therefore you have to have full 3 months for a full crop. Rabbi Akiva Savar, near Rabbi Chazaka, Rabbi Akiva is of the opinion that plowing is a chazaka. Now the Gemara says, hold on, but Tizbra, you think machlokes is whether plowing is enough? If that's the case, Rabbi Akiva might Aryeh Chodesh. Why do you have to have a full month for plowing? Top of Lama Vava Mabez. I feel Yom Echad. 1 day would also be enough. How long does it take to plow a field? 1 day. So why does Rabbi Akiva say you have to have a full month, then a year, then a full month? Just say a year with a day and a day. Everybody agrees that plowing is not a chazaka. And therefore 1 day in year 1 and 1 day in year 3 of plowing is not enough. V'hacha pera rabba v'pera zuta ikabenayu. It's machlokes of how much fruit do you have to actually go ahead and harvest. So you look at Rashbam, he explains, Vishmal spirulate the law v'chazaka atse yilkat pera rabba dahainu kishenigmra kol hatvua. You have to allow a full harvest to go through, which takes three months, because different types of produce takes a different amount of time. Therefore, for everything to go, you have to have 3 months. Rikiva says you don't have to wait for everything to grow. As long as one thing grows in 1 month, that's enough. Tana Rabbanan. Once we mentioned plowing, Tana Rabbanan, near in a chazaka. Plowing, just plowing someone's field is not a chazaka. Yesh Omrim, some say, Harei za chazaka, it is a chazaka. Gemara says, Man Yesh Omrim. Who is this Yesh Omrim that says that simply plowing someone's field is considered a chazaka? Amr Chista tells us from Achi, it's from Acha, the Tanya, for it says in a Brisa, Nora Shana, a person plowed the field for a year, Vizara Beis, and he planted for 2 years. Or Nara Beis, he planted for 2 years, Vizara Shana, and he planted for 1 year. So even in a case where 2 out of the 3 years were plowing, but the halacha is Eina Chazaka. It's not going to work. However, Bacha says, Harezu Chazaka. It is a Chazaka even if 2 of the years were only plowing. Amar Rashi explains, Sha'alis kol Gedolei Adar. I asked all the Gedolei Adar, v'amru, they told me near Harei Chazaka. Plowing is a Chazaka. Amar lei Rav Bibi Rav Nachman. Rav Bibi said to Rav Nachman, my time is about Amar near Harei Chazaka. What is the logic behind the one who says that plowing is a good Chazaka? Why? Because lo avid inish the krivu le Aryeh v'shasik. Again, it's not normal for a person to watch someone else just enter his field with a full plowing equipment. The guy shows up with a tractor and everything else that he needs to plow, and he's just going to be silent. He'll be like, excuse me, sir, what's all the noise? What's going on over here? My time is about the Amar Nir Lo Avi Chazaka. What's the logic behind the one who says that plowing is not a chazaka? Because Meimar Amar, the guy says, Call Shiba v'Shiba dekarvu la'ayobei. You want to go ahead and plow my field? As they say, Gezunta hey, enjoy it. No problem. I'm happy for myself to spare the labor of going outside, schwitzing it up outside to try to plow the field. You go ahead and do it. I'm not going to have a problem. I'm not going to object to that. Shalchu lei b'nei Pumnara Rav Nachman. The people of Pumnara sent a question to Rav Nachman bar Rav Chisda, and they said to him, Yilamdeinu Rabbeinu, Rabbi, please teach us. Nira v'chazaka, Allah v'chazaka. Is plowing the field considered to be a chazaka or not? Amr lahu, he said to him, he said to them, so this is Rav Nachman bar Chisda saying to these people, you have Rav Acha, v'chol g'doli adar omar, nir, amri nir ha-v'chazaka. Rav Acha, as we just quoted, and all the Gedolei Adar say that near plowing is a chazaka, and therefore if you occupy the field by plowing it, it's a good chazaka. Amar of Nachman, Bar Yitzchak, Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak responded and said to him, Rabusa lemichshav gavri, well, it makes you feel good to go ahead and just count all the people who say it's a chazaka. You forgot about Haravu Shmuel b'Bavel, Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Kiva Beretz Yisrael, Amri Nir Lev chazaka. You have Rav and Shmuel and Shmuel and Rabbi Kiva all telling you that near plowing is not a good chazaka. So therefore, the fact that you were able to quote the Gedolei Adar and Rav Acha is not sufficient. Now, who are all these people? We know. Rishmo, Rabbi Kiva, Masnisa. Rishmo and Rabbi Kiva from our Mishnah. They both said you have to have either a full 3 months in the previous year and a full 3 months in the last year, or a full month and in year 1 and a full month in year 2, in year 3. And both of those would agree that month or those 3 months is not just simply for plowing; it's for actually harvesting, for growing. So, and Rav, how do we know that Rav is of this opinion? Dam Rabbi Yehuda Rav, Zudir Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Kiva, we have this quote from Rav who said that even in our Mishnah, where we have Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Kiva say you can make a chazak in either 18 months or in 14 months, but he says no, there's an opinion of the Rabbanan, which actually was quoted in the beginning of the parak. We can't get into that right now, but ultimately, they say you have to have a chazaka even to stay about. You feel that it needs to be irrigated for a full 3 years. What's that coming to exclude? Near doesn't that come to exclude plowing? So we have Rav telling us that plowing doesn't work. That's not going to work. Shmuel Maihi, where is Shmuel? The Amr Yehuda Shmuel, Zudir Shmuel B'Akiva. That's the opinion of Shmuel B'Akiva. This was the part of the Mishnah which said that if you have certain objective harvest, like when it comes to harvesting the olives and the other things that are listed in the Mishnah. It's not sufficient that you're going to just take in a certain amount of grapes or olives. You have to do it 3 times in order to establish a chazaka. Maybe now what's the difference between them? It's this small little tree. So Rashbam tells us it's dekel yalada ubachura. It's a small tree. The pachos migimol shalom shlemos to'enes gimol palmim. It carries 3. It will give off its fruit in less amount of time. Could do it in less than 3 years. So as actually in the parenthesis it says she'osa shalosh palmim b'shana. It does 3 times in 1 year. That will work. So we have the Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Akiva, Rab, and Shmuel. All of us telling us that simply plowing a field is not the sufficient way to make a chazaka. Have a wonderful day.